Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, another fun and exciting episode for you guys today because we are putting the RetroTink 4K directly up against the PixelFX Morph 4K in a head-to-head showdown on MiSTer FPGA with Direct Video 1 mode. Before we jump into any of the tests, I want you to be very well aware I have utilized all of the features of both scalers to get the best image I possibly can out of both of them, so I have articulated the ever-loving hell out of both sides of the comparisons that you're going to see. And just so you know, whether you're using the RetroTink 4K or the PixelFX Morph 4K, there's going to be some adjustments you need to do across both devices. Sometimes the image was not centered for me on one if not both of these scalers. Now taking a look at Dracula X on the Super Nintendo core, first we have the RetroTink 4K. So watch the overall scale, watch the flames in the background, that little bit of the visual effect. That's where I kind of wanted to start this off here. We're going to go from the RetroTink 4K source directly over to the Morph 4K, and you will see the difference or not difference depending on what your eyes are showing you. Basically, when you get the settings dialed in correctly, there is a negligible difference to a non-existent difference depending on what core and what game we're looking at. I would say here, RetroTink 4K versus Morph 4K, it is maybe like a 0.5% brighter on the Morph side of things. And you'll see on the left hand side of the screen, I'm going to show you what these sources are. But the great part is, at least on the Super Nintendo core, whether you use the RetroTink 4K or whether you use the Morph 4K, you are getting an extremely competent, great scale from Direct Video 1 mode over to 4K. So you really can't go wrong with either of these options. There is a slight color difference between the Morph 4K and the RetroTink 4K, but that can obviously be adjusted in any number of the settings if you want to really dial them in. But color on these systems is highly subjective. You'd really have to plug a Super Nintendo into a CRT television to understand what you were supposed to see. Now moving back to the Morph 4K side of things, I've also tried to play the game as closely as possible, having the same effects occur in the same spots. And if at any point in time you see the heart counter flickering, it does it across the Morph 4K as well as the RetroTink. It also does it on my television. It just seems to be something the game likes to do, has nothing to do with the individual scalers. But again, if I took the titles of the scalers off of the screen, at least on this first example, you would have absolutely no idea, no way to tell which one was which. Let's move back over to the RetroTink and throw some scan lines on. This is where they kind of diverge in their overall look, and with scan lines it is subjective. Whatever looks good to you looks good to you, and that is correct. So on the RetroTink side of things, I will turn on some scan lines. I like them a little bit finer here on that overall wibbliness in the flame effects, that kind of heat light bending. This looks good to me. If we move over to the Morph 4K and turn on their version of scan lines, you're going to see it's a little bit darker. The scan lines are going to be a little bit denser, but honestly it also looks really good. That house in the background looks like it's a little bit more in shadow from the flame. So again, this is a subjective test as far as scan lines are concerned, but you're getting a good result no matter what you do. Now let's move over to the PlayStation 1 core, and I always use the second Crash Bandicoot game to test just because it's one of my favorites. Now this is stock settings on the core, and every single test you're seeing here is going to be stock. I have not done anything in the core settings other than turn on the game and start recording. So you'll see here, excellent image. Robert's done a great job on the PlayStation 1 core. Moving over to the Morph 4K side of things again, and you basically have what seems to be a very similar image. Now there is a little bit of strangeness in the Morph 4K when it reads Direct Video 1 mode on the PlayStation 1 core, but I'll get into that in just a moment. But you'll see here as we run the same area in the game at the same time, they are extremely close. But let's go side by side, Morph on the left, RetroTink on the right. At least to my eyes, on my production monitors, the source for the Morph is slightly brighter, maybe 1 to 2% brighter of an image. Pay attention in the highlights, you're going to see they glow a little bit more, versus on the RetroTink 4K side of things, they are a little bit more subdued. Now you could jump into the gamma settings or anything else and kind of make them match 100%, but this is something that I kind of wanted to just show the difference between both, so you can leave me a comment down below and let me know if you prefer one or the other. Honestly, these are very within the margin of error, and do be aware I'm not injecting any HDR here. I am just doing this based upon an SDR color profile. So when we get over to the ISO level on the RetroTink side of things, pay attention to the snow, look at the color of it, look at the overall luminance of the actual brightest parts of the screen. That is going to be very important because when we move over to the morph sample right here, you're going to see that it brightens up ever so slightly. In this instance, at least in these hotspots, I prefer the Morph 4K just because that little bit of extra brightness is what I would think when I did see snow. But I will say that the Morph 4K at the current firmware as of recording this video does not play well with direct video mode on the PlayStation 1 core. It is just not ingesting that metadata correctly, so I went in the scaler and in the crop settings did horizontal offsets, vertical offsets, as well as scaled the image manually to get to where I needed to be. But I'm not telling you what source this is for Crash Bandicoot. This could be RetroTink 4K. It could be the Morph 4K. Leave me a comment down below and tell me if you can tell the difference based upon the details I've given you at this point in time. I think you should be able to know which one this is based upon one clue I gave you when I talked about snow. Let's move back over to a 2D game, obviously Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on the Mega Drive core, and you'll notice here on the RetroTink 4K side of things, we have a little bit of garbage on the bottom of the screen. Now we're going to have the exact same garbage on the bottom of the screen when we go over to the Morph 4K as well, so they're both doing the same thing, and this is just something that can happen within the Sega Genesis core. You can get some little bits of floating information at the bottom. It is totally normal and we could totally crop this out, but I wanted you to know that they were both doing the same thing. But as far as the motion here is concerned on a fast game like Sonic the Hedgehog 2, the RetroTink 4K is doing an absolutely outstanding job of rendering it all into 4K for my capture card. Now we move over to the Morph 4K, and again you're going to see that this is slightly brighter than the RetroTink. This seems to be the biggest difference. You can change it around of course, but as I capture these, it just seems to be slightly brighter in the image. But the good thing is both look absolutely incredible. Both are showing the same amount of garbage pixels at the bottom of the screen, and both accepted DV information across HDMI into the HDMI in exactly like you would expect them to. So if you want to play some Sega Genesis Sonic the Hedgehog, you can do it across the Morph, you can do it across the Tink. Both of them played extremely well with my capture card in direct video mode. Although I will say on the RetroTink side of things, my capture card does love to lose the audio when I change cores, but that could very well be something on the Elgato side of things. If you've had that issue, leave me a comment down below. I would be curious to know. And if we move over to the Morph 4K and throw on some scan lines, you can make the image darker and just kind of play around with things. But every single image I've seen out of both scalers so far on the 4K side of things has been very good in my opinion. Now we move over to the RetroTink 4K and we use the Super Gaussian scan lines, and again we have a little bit lighter of a scan line and a little bit more brightness in the image. You can adjust the gamma on these all day long. There is no one true way to apply scan lines to your image. Whatever looks good to you is what the correct thing to do is. But again, this is just a really nice, really pleasing image, and here comes test 2. Based upon everything I've told you about the video quality across both of these scalers on Sonic the Hedgehog 2, you leave me a comment down below and you tell me which one you think you're looking at right here. But from 2D, again, we're going to move to 3D with Banjo-Tooie. I am playing this on the Nintendo 64 Turbo Core with the 60 frame per second patch. Now here is a situation in which I do have a deviance. This is the RetroTink obviously. Look at where the image is on the screen for Banjo-Tooie. The scale is there, it's in letterbox. It is what it should look like. If we move over to the more 4K side of things, the scale is correct on the introductory sequence as far as the XY coordinates and what the actual aspect ratio would be. It's just shrunken down by like 5% off the top. Once you actually get into the game, it 100% adheres side by side, no issues whatsoever, but this was a really tiny difference, and honestly if I didn't tell you, you'd probably never notice. But honestly, in the Nintendo 64 image quality with all of the VI pipeline effects turned on, either scaler would hide pretty much any sin it was committing because the blurriness in Nintendo 64 footage is very friendly to being scaled and basically hiding any issues. But even though I looked as hard as I could on the RetroTink side of things, I couldn't find any issue with this whatsoever. Getting Banjo-Tooie at that 60 frame per second patch in the Turbo Core scaled all the way up to 4K with the RetroTink 4K is a 10 out of 10 image. I love it all day long and I have absolutely no issues with it. So let's talk about what the Morph is doing on the exact same segment in the exact same game. And do be aware, I did try again to play these as close as possible. They are different sources. They are labeled as such in my timeline. but you'll see here it basically looks identical. This is the good thing about MiSTer in Direct Video 1 mode, and the scalers when they are correctly interpreting the digital information coming over the HDMI cable. And in the Morph's instance, this is another core which plays extremely well with DV1 mode and will take care of the scaling and cropping for you exactly correctly. The RetroTink has the slight lead on cores as far as metadata is concerned on Direct Video mode, but I'm sure the Morph 4K with another update could probably get the few things like the PlayStation 1 core 100% working. And again, Direct Video mode, it's not like it's a finalized thing, it is a moving target and it still gets updates. And as we go into the zombified throne room here, again, just look at the floor, look at the light coming in through the window. You see that slight gradient trying to emulate a real lighting source when this is probably just a pre-baked shadow map in here would be my assumption, but again, not a developer. But as you look at the couch and kind of run around, get a sense of what the light from that window looks like on the floor on the RetroTink 4K side of things. When we move over to the more 4K source, I want you to look at this exact same area and that exact same light and kind of try to see if you spot a difference. So now we're coming into the same throne room, except on the more 4K, same cores, same files. In the Nintendo 64 core, once we get to those shadows, you're going to see that they might ever be slightly brighter, but it is much closer than we saw in something like Crash Bandicoot. But I do like that sense of vibrancy across both scalers. It's really selling the image well here, and getting these both in 4K is just an absolute blast of a time. Basically, again, you can't really go wrong with either of them here. Those highlights on Banjo there, though, I think look like 1% better on the Morph side of things. Now, you knew there wasn't going to be a comparison without me talking about Matra Melee on the Neo Geo core. This is my favorite fighting game of all time. I'm not saying it's the best fighting game, but for me, it makes me happy every time I play it. Now, from the RetroTink footage to the Morph footage, you're going to see no negligible difference whatsoever in the image quality, the colors, or otherwise. The thing is, the difference is in the background. On the RetroTink 4K side of things, Direct Video mode with the auto scale ingested that metadata perfectly fine, although I did have to shift it over 88 points to the left on the X coordinate. But that seems to be something that the core is doing. Now when we move over to the more 4K side of things, you're going to see everything looks exactly the same. The colors, the performance, the scale, it is all there. The only difference is I manually scaled this with the cropping and scaling features as well as the horizontal and vertical offset so that I could have the same image. This took me maybe 20 seconds of fine adjustment because on the Morph side of things, the metadata on Direct Video just does not seem to be read correctly. But again, those can just be very quick firmware updates, and the best part is both scalers give us unlimited options on the scale, on the crop, and on the offset so that we can do whatever we want. But on this source at least, I had to do everything manually within the scaler to make sure that I had everything constrained correctly and the image was filling the screen in a manner in which I thought was correct. So if you want to do the more 4K route on something like MiSTer, you may need to go into those settings and change things ever so slightly more often, but it's like a 20 to 30 second change at the most, so it's really not going to take up too much of your gaming time whatsoever. Versus the RetroTink 4K, where it has taken every single Direct Video signal I've thrown at it, except the Sharp X68000, and that's because that core's not done. Not a knock on the Tink. Now moving over to the Sega Saturn side of things, we're playing my favorite game, Saturn Bomberman. This is my favorite Sega Saturn game of all time, and I stand by that statement. Now, I'm not telling you which source is which here. I'm not even trying to really test you on this. I'm just trying to show that when all situations are optimal, just how incredibly close these images can be, because this right here is either the RetroTink or the Morph 4K, but if I don't tell you and you can't notice the difference, then it really doesn't matter which one it is. You just know we're getting a good result across both scalers in Direct Video mode. So let's move over to the next source here, watch those colors, watch everything, and honestly, I have dialed these in within the scalers. If I did not have file names on the files, I would not be able to tell you which one was which either. So if you want to pick up a RetroTink 4K to use with your MiSTer FPGA in Direct Video mode, you're going to get 10 out of 10 image quality, and you're going to get all of the Direct Video metadata ingested correctly. If you want to go the more 4K route of things, you're going to get an excellent excellent image quality, 10 out of 10. You just may need to dial in a few cores manually, but otherwise they're basically doing close to the exact same thing. So if this was a shootout, if this was a duel, either both participants just got hit in the head and they're dead, or both people missed and everyone walked away. So you do have options here. As far as 4K HDMI in scaling is concerned, these both do an excellent job. And as far as any of the stuff going on in the community with who doesn't like who or who's not nice to who, I have no clue. I do not care. I'm just talking about hardware, so don't ask me down below. But short of that, that's the comparison you guys asked for, and this was a tight race. Really, there is no winner. Bye-bye.